My granddad didn't just have wrinkles. He had years pressed into his skin. Not softly, not kindly. They were carved there by hunger, by waiting, by learning too early that in this world, no one is coming to save you. I remember looking at him. He didn't look old. He looked solid, like someone shaped by pressure. There was a hardness in his eyes, not cruelty, not anger, survival, a quiet kind of strength that comes from staying alive when things fall apart. He was just a kid, maybe 10 years old. That's when the ground disappeared beneath him. He watched his father stand on the porch, a man who once felt enormous, unmovable, and he watched everything they own get lifted into the back of a stranger's truck. Not just the job, not just the money, the house, the safety, that simple belief that if you worked hard, tomorrow would take care of itself. It all went with that truck. During those years, hunger wasn't an idea. It wasn't something distant. It lived inside the body, a constant dull pull in the stomach. When you lay down at night, a quiet pain that never fully left. You saw it in your mother's face when she handed you her piece of bread and said she wasn't hungry. You wore your older brother's boots, too big at first, then too small, until the soles were thin, until your toes pressed against the leather, and still, you didn't say anything, because you could see it, that look in your parents' eyes. Shame, exhaustion, fear they tried to hide, a look no child should ever have to learn how to read. Those years taught him something deep, something that never softened with age. The world doesn't owe you anything. Not comfort, not fairness, not time to catch your breath. If you wanted to eat, you worked. If you wanted a roof, you fought to keep it. Nothing stayed unless you held on to it yourself. That lesson stayed with him. It shaped how he spoke, how he moved, how he saved every coin. Because he knew how quickly everything could disappear again. They moved from dust-filled field to skies heavy with lead, almost without pause. One life ending, another beginning. Not because they wanted it, because it was required. They didn't think of themselves as heroes. They came back as men who carried things. They never learned how to set down. Just when they started to feel steady, when their feet finally touched something solid, the world caught fire again. They didn't go searching for a war. They didn't ask to be remembered. But when the call came, they stepped forward, and they finished what was placed in front of them. My uncle was barely 18, still had a boy's face, frozen in his school photos. One moment thinking about dances, about girls, about what came next. The next moment, running toward a beach, under a sky that wanted to kill him. Life shrank, not into years, not into dreams, into minutes, into seconds. And while the men were gone, the women held everything upright. Factory floors, long shifts, metal biting into raw hands, skin split, fingers aching. No softness, no space to rest. There was no language for exhaustion. There was only the task. When the war finally ended, and everyone came home, something quiet moved in with them. It sat at the dinner table, not spoken, not named. They didn't talk about what they saw, or who didn't return. Not because they forgot, because remembering out loud would have taken too much, so they buried it deep and focused on the next responsibility. Raising children, keeping food in the fridge, making sure tomorrow showed up. To them, talking about feelings wasn't weakness, it was a luxury. Something for people who had time. They didn't have time to fall apart, so they didn't. They woke up, pulled on their boots, and did what needed doing. Again, and again, and again. Over time, that effort hardened into habit. Survival stopped being a decision. It became instinct, something built into how they worked, how they showed love, even when they never found the words to explain it. Imagine a day when the sun disappears at noon, not slowly, not gently, just gone. And the only way to keep a baby breathing is to press a wet rag over their face. For my mother, that wasn't a story. It was an ordinary day. In the 1930s, she was born straight into the storm, not into childhood, but into survival. She used to describe the plains like something pulled from a bad dream, mornings that felt normal. Then the horizon would darken, the sky turning bruised, heavy, wrong, dust rolling in like a wall, farms swallowed in minutes, sound disappearing, light collapsing, inside the house everything filled with gray, plates, sheets, milk. By morning, nothing was clean anymore. They soaked old rags in water, tied them over babies' faces, not for comfort, for breath. They watched their parents pack what little remained into the back of a tired truck, lives reduced to scraps. They drove west, chasing rumors, chasing work, chasing something that might hold, only to meet closed borders, signs that said there was no room left. Growing up inside that kind of world changes something quietly. You learn early that noise is dangerous, that questions don't help. When you look at the adults around you and see fear in their eyes too, you stop asking why. You don't demand answers. You don't make yourself noticeable. You lower your voice. You lower your expectations. You put your head down and you focus on one thing only: getting through the next day, 24 hours at a time. For them, silence wasn't emptiness. It wasn't personality missing. It was protection, a shield they carried so they could keep going. In the 50s, the greatest danger wasn't an explosion. It was a whisper, a quiet word from the wrong person at the wrong time. You learned quickly that the safest life was the one no one noticed. When the war finally ended, people expected relief, a deep breath, a return to normal. But fear doesn't disappear. It just changes its face. The bombs faded. The tension stayed. Now it lived in shadows and in rumors, in sideways looks. A cold fog settled over everyday life. You could feel it. Even on calm mornings, a teacher gone overnight, 20 years in the same classroom, and suddenly their desk was empty. Not for something they'd done today, for a book they once read, for a name written down decades earlier. Neighbors stopped speaking freely. People you once trusted began measuring their words. Barbecues felt quieter. Laughter ended sooner. Everyone wondering who might be listening, who might misunderstand, who might report. In that kind of world, visibility became dangerous. Standing out meant risk. So the safest thing to be was invisible. Not loud, not different, not memorable, just present enough to belong. That pressure shaped a generation, not because they lacked imagination, not because they lacked dreams, because they understood the cost. They had already seen how quickly a life could be taken apart. So they chose stability, gray suits, steady jobs. Rules followed exactly as written. No scenes, no sharp edges. They became dependable, quiet, the engine beneath the surface, keeping everything running while the world slowly grew louder. They traded their own voices for the safety of the group. And that kind of peace always asks for something in return. We were the first ones to grow up with neat fences out front and fallout shelters out back. Life looked perfect on the surface, but somewhere in the background, one eye always watched the sky. Waiting, then came the boomers, children of victory, born into a country that felt unstoppable, everything expanding, brightening, turning colorful, rows of new houses, fresh paint, lawns cut just right. For the first time, ordinary families could claim something of their own, a small piece of stability. I remember when someone got their first television. It wasn't just a screen. It felt like a promise, a glowing box in the living room, telling everyone that things were finally going to be okay. Their parents wanted that future desperately. After the hunger of the 30s, after the loss of the 40s, they wanted their children to have more food, more safety, more hope, taller, smarter, happier. And for a moment, it almost worked. But even in that brightness, something darker never left. You could be sitting in class, numbers on the board, chalk dust in the air, and suddenly, the alarm. Desks scraping, bodies folding down, heads tucked, knees tight, waiting for a flash that never came. Growing up like that does something strange. One foot in a playground, the other near the edge of annihilation. They watched their parents go silent. During moments like the Cuban Missile Crisis, faces drained, voices low. They understood, even as kids, that a single phone call could end everything. That awareness stayed with them. They had more than anyone before, but they lived with a clock, ticking quietly in the background. It made them restless, urgent, a need to live loudly, to move fast, because no one could promise the world would still be there by the time they grew up. You can't watch your heroes die on live television and never see authority the same way again. Something breaks, quietly at first, then all at once. By the mid-60s, the bright suburban promise didn't just fade, it shattered. You were young, full of belief, certain the future was moving in the right direction. Then the shots came. Dallas, a president gone in seconds. Then Memphis, a balcony. Another voice silenced, then another name. Each time it felt like something was torn out of the future, not just men lost. The idea that things were going to be okay, that trust didn't have time to heal, because Vietnam followed, and this war felt different. No clear lines, no clean story, just heat, confusion, fear that clung to everything. For the first time, the war didn't stay far away. It walked into the living room every night. While families ate dinner, the television showed mud, blood, body bags. The government spoke calmly, promised progress, promised light ahead, but the screen told a different truth. And people noticed that gap between what was said and what was seen. That's where trust collapsed. It didn't matter where you stood, in the jungle with a rifle or in the streets with a sign. The realization was the same. The men behind polished desks weren't untouchable. They could be wrong. They could lie. They could send an entire generation into something they didn't understand. That was the moment belief gave way to something louder. The silence that once held the country together began to crack. And what came out of it wasn't calm. It was the sound of betrayal, finally being spoken aloud. We were promised a future made of machines, clean, effortless, bright, a world that was supposed to work. Instead, we got empty pumps, long lines, and leaders who looked straight into the camera and lied. This was the generation caught in between, the bridge, the ones later called Generation Jones. My older brother was one of them. They grew up watching perfect families on television, smiling faces, solved problems, 30 minutes to harmony. They were told the future was inevitable, that progress would carry them forward. But right as they reached for it, the ground shifted. The promise didn't fade gently. It snapped. They got their driver's licenses, just in time to wait for fuel. Engines off, windows down, hours spent staring at the backs of cars, going nowhere. The economy slowed, prices climbed, paychecks stopped keeping up, and then came the moment that changed the tone of everything. A president exposed, a resignation, a country watching trust collapse in real time. It left them restless, searching for something they couldn't quite define. Not rebellion, not obedience, stability, a future that felt solid again. They weren't old enough to belong to the past, not young enough to reshape the system. So they adapted, they learned how to blend, how to shift when the rules changed, because the old ones no longer worked, and the new ones hadn't arrived yet. They became practical, flexible, always ready to pivot, not because they wanted to, because the dream ran out of fuel. Right as they started driving, we didn't grow up with parents hovering nearby. We grew up with a key on a string, hanging heavy against the chest, a small piece of metal. That meant one thing. You're on your own now. We weren't watched. We weren't tracked. We disappeared for hours, from morning cartoons until the streetlights blinked on. That's when you knew. It was time to come home. They called us the latchkey kids, and it fit. For the first time, both parents had to work. Not for extras, for survival. The house was quiet when we got back. No voices, no instructions. Just the hum of appliances and the echo of our own footsteps. There were no phones in our pockets. No one to call. If something went wrong, you handled it. If you fell off your bike, half a mile away, you didn't cry for help. You brushed the dirt off, checked the damage, and figured out how to get home. We drank water from garden hoses, built forts from scrap wood, learned rules from older kids instead of adults. Life taught us fast and without explanation. We also watched families change, divorces rising, back seats filled with silence, trying to understand why everything felt unstable. That independence wasn't heroic, it was required, and it settled deep. It hardened something inside us. We learned early that the world doesn't pause, that it doesn't check in. If you wanted something done, you did it yourself. We didn't expect applause. We didn't wait for permission. We learned how to sit alone in an empty living room and make it feel normal. That's where our toughness came from. Quiet, uncelebrated, built from learning how to stand when no one was watching. We stepped into the workforce. Right as the promise disappeared, the idea of a job for life fed into a shredder. What our grandparents knew no longer existed. We arrived in the 80s, just in time to watch everything change. The language shifted, efficiency, restructuring, shareholder value. Behind those words, people vanished. We watched our parents, decades of loyalty behind them, get erased with a meeting invite. 20 years, 30 years, reduced to a line on a spreadsheet. I still remember the silence at the kitchen table, the way the air felt heavier, bills stacked neatly, no one speaking, security gone, in a single afternoon. That moment stayed with us, not as anger, as clarity. We understood something early. The company would never love you back. Not really, so we adjusted, not by giving less, by trusting less. We learned to keep options open, extra skills, backup plans. Before anyone called it a side hustle, we already had one. We worked hard, but never blindly, always aware of the door behind us. Resumes updated, just in case. We didn't expect a gold watch or applause at the end. We knew better. Some people called us cynical, detached, but it didn't feel like bitterness. It felt like accuracy. Seeing the world as it was, a place where loyalty only works when both sides show up, and one of them often doesn't. When you step back and look at everything together, you start to notice it, every generation, carrying something heavy, not loudly, not dramatically, just carried, from grandfathers who faced hunger without flinching to children who learned early how to sit alone in quiet rooms. There's a line that runs through all of it, a steady pull forward, made of grit, of endurance, of refusing to stop. Even when stopping would have made sense, we kept moving. While the ground shifted beneath us, we learned something the hard way. The world isn't always fair. The people in charge don't always protect you. Dreams can disappear, promises can collapse, security can vanish with a signature on paper, and still, we remained, not untouched, but standing. Somewhere along the way, we realized something quietly. No one was coming. No rescue, no final moment where everything made sense. So we adjusted, not with speeches, with action. We kept going, wiped our hands, lowered our expectations, and did what needed doing. We didn't wait for a hero to arrive from somewhere else, because eventually we understood who it had to be, the one in the mirror. Looking back, that's the part no one talks about. Not the fences, not the cars, not the image, but the quiet fire underneath it all. The one that says, even without words, I'm still here. We were shaped by what came before us, by the weight our parents carried, by the lessons we absorbed without being taught, and somehow we kept going. Not because it was easy, because it was necessary. And maybe that's the truth beneath all of it. We don't just survive the storm. Over time, we learn how to walk through it.